Ever since I was a teenager, I've been fascinated by true crime stories, the kind that make your skin crawl and leave you wondering what you would do if you found yourself in the same situation. Over the years, I've devoured countless documentaries, podcasts, and books, always drawn to the darker side of human nature. But it wasn't until recently, when I started reading forums and social media threads about Uber horror stories, that I realized just how close to home some of these terrifying experiences can be. Most people take Uber rides for granted, assuming they're just a quick, convenient way to get from point A to point B. The app makes it feel so safe and controlled. You see the driver's name and photo, the car's make and license plate, and you can share your trip details with friends or family. For the most part, rides go smoothly, and the worst you usually have to deal with is awkward small talk or a driver who swerves a bit too aggressively. Still, lurking beneath those ordinary rides are stories that make you question everything. Tales of strange passengers, eerie destinations, and moments when the normal rules of safety seem to break down entirely. What struck me most was how many drivers and passengers have shared their encounters online, some almost too unbelievable to be true. These aren't just urban legends or creepy rumors whispered in the dark. They are real stories, shared in detail by people who lived through them, and whose lives were profoundly affected by what happened. I spent nights scrolling through these accounts, feeling a mix of fascination and unease. What I found was a pattern of encounters that started innocently enough, but quickly descended into something chilling. Tonight, I want to share 4 of the most haunting Uber horror stories I came across, stories that stuck with me long after I finished reading them. They reveal how quickly a routine ride can turn into a nightmare, how drivers and passengers alike can find themselves vulnerable, and how the very technology meant to keep us safe can sometimes fail us in the most disturbing ways. The first story comes from a driver named Marcus, who started his night shift like any other. He'd been driving for Uber for a few years, mostly working late evenings when the city was quieter and the tips were better. Marcus prided himself on being friendly and professional, always checking his mirrors and making sure his passengers felt comfortable. But on this particular night, something fell off from the moment he accepted the ride request. The app notified Marcus of his next pickup, a man waiting alone at a gas station on the edge of town. The man's name was Greg, and his profile was unremarkable. No ratings, no reviews, just a single photo that looked like it had been taken years ago. When Marcus pulled up, Greg climbed into the back seat without saying a word. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, the kind that makes you glance in the rearview mirror more often than usual. Greg's eyes were fixed on the window, but his expression was blank, unreadable. Marcus tried to break the ice with small talk, asking about Greg's plans or where he was headed, but the only response was a quiet, almost monotone, "Just get me there." The route took them through dimly lit streets, and then onto a stretch of highway that Marcus rarely drove. The GPS showed their destination as a small, rundown motel, far from the bustling downtown area. As they approached, Greg suddenly directed Marcus to pull over near a strip of trees beside the road. "We're here," Greg said simply, opening the door before Marcus had a chance to ask questions. Marcus watched as Greg disappeared into the shadows, leaving the car door open behind him. Unease crept up his spine. He sat there, engine running, waiting for a sign that Greg would return. Minutes passed, and the stillness around him grew oppressive. Something about the way Greg had exited the car, so abruptly, so detached, didn't sit right. Then, out of nowhere, Marcus heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind the car. A voice whispered from the darkness, "You shouldn't have stopped." Startled, Marcus looked over his shoulder but saw nothing except the faint outline of trees swaying in the night breeze. Heart pounding, he locked the doors and hit the gas, pulling back onto the road without another word. When Marcus checked the app later, the trip had been canceled, and Greg's profile vanished without a trace. He reported the incident to Uber, but the company said there was no record of the ride, as if it had never happened at all. That night haunted Marcus for weeks. He couldn't shake the feeling that something dangerous had brushed against him, something lurking just beyond the reach of his headlights. He began to question every passenger, every silent moment, every shadow he'd ignored before. As unsettling as Marcus's story was, it was just the beginning. The second tale came from a woman named Lisa, who had taken an Uber ride alone late one Saturday night after a concert. Lisa was used to rideshares, She worked in the city and often relied on Uber to get home safely after late shifts or nights out. But this ride was different. It started harmlessly enough, but ended with her feeling like she was being followed. Lisa's driver was friendly at first, chatting about the weather and the city's nightlife. But as they drove through quieter neighborhoods, Lisa noticed the driver kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror in a way that made her skin crawl. When she tried to focus on her phone, the driver's eyes didn't leave her face. At one point, Lisa asked the driver to pull over so she could get out and take a shortcut home. He agreed, but then insisted on waiting in the car. As she walked away, Lisa kept looking back, feeling a growing sense of dread. When she reached her front door, she turned to see the driver's car still parked across the street, the engine running but empty. Lisa's phone buzzed with a notification. The Uber app showed the trip was still active. Confused and scared, she called Uber support, but the driver never responded to her messages. That night, Lisa stayed inside, locking every door and window, wondering if the driver was still out there, watching. These stories, along with the others I discovered, share more than just moments of fear. They reveal how quickly a seemingly normal ride can spiral into something unrecognizable. How the people we trust to keep us safe can sometimes be the source of our deepest anxieties. They remind us that behind every app notification and every shared location pin, there is a human being vulnerable to the unexpected. As I continued to read, I realized that these Uber horror stories weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a larger pattern of encounters that challenge our assumptions about safety and control in the digital age. And while technology offers convenience, it also opens doors to new kinds of risks that drivers and passengers alike must learn to navigate carefully. With that in mind, I want to share the next stories I found, accounts that escalate in tension and reveal just how unpredictable and dangerous some Uber rides can become. But before I get to those, I think it's important to understand the atmosphere of uncertainty and unease that sets the stage for these nightmarish experiences. Because sometimes, the scariest part isn't what happens inside the car. It's what you sense lurking just beyond the headlights. The uneasy feeling that settled over Marcus and Lisa wasn't unique. As I dug deeper into the stories shared by drivers and passengers, I found accounts that grew increasingly tense and unsettling, each one a reminder of how quickly a ride can shift from normal to nightmarish. One of the earliest stories I came across was told by a driver named Jenna. She was used to late-night rides, the kind where the city's energy felt different, quieter, but more unpredictable. On a chilly autumn evening, Jenna accepted a request from a man named David. His profile showed high ratings and a friendly photo, so she didn't think twice about picking him up from a downtown bar. David got in the car with a slight smile, but Jenna immediately noticed a tension in his posture, the way his eyes darted around nervously. As they pulled away, he was mostly silent, occasionally muttering under his breath. Jenna tried to keep the mood light, asking about his night, but David's responses were curt, almost hostile. The GPS directed them to a neighborhood Jenna barely recognized, streets lined with closed businesses and a few flickering streetlights. Without warning, David's demeanor shifted. He slammed his fist on the window and demanded Jenna stop the car. Confused and alarmed, Jenna pulled over, asking if everything was okay. David's eyes glinted with something dark, anger, desperation, or something worse. He leaned forward and whispered, "I need you to get out. Now." Jenna's heart pounded. She refused and tried to reason with him, but David suddenly lunged toward the front seat, grabbing the steering wheel. The car jerked violently as Jenna struggled to regain control. She managed to push him away and threw the car into gear, speeding down the street with David yelling behind her. By the time she reached a busy intersection, Jenna was shaking, her hands trembling on the wheel. She called 911 as she pulled over and waited for the police. The officers arrived quickly and took David into custody. It turned out he had been involved in a bar fight earlier and was trying to escape. Jenna's ordeal was terrifying, but it was also a stark reminder of how vulnerable drivers can be when they're alone with strangers. Another story I found, this time from a passenger named Rachel, was no less disturbing. Rachel had taken an Uber home after a late shift at a restaurant. The driver seemed normal enough, polite, quiet, and focused on the road. But as they drove through unfamiliar parts of the city, Rachel noticed something unsettling. The driver wasn't following the route she had requested. When she asked about it, he shrugged and said, "Just a shortcut." But the shortcut led them down dimly lit streets, past abandoned buildings and empty lots. Rachel's unease grew with every turn. Then, as they neared her neighborhood, the driver slowed down and started to drop off other passengers, except for Rachel, who realized he was following her home. She told him to stop several times, but the driver insisted they were almost there. When they finally pulled up outside her house, Rachel hurried out, locking the door behind her and peering through the window. To her horror, the driver didn't leave. Instead, he parked across the street and stayed there, watching. Rachel called Uber and the police, but by the time officers arrived, the driver had vanished. She was left shaken, realizing how exposed she had been in what should have been a safe, routine ride. These stories share an unsettling pattern. Moments of silence filled with tension, eerie destinations, and passengers or drivers who suddenly reveal a dangerous side. Whether it's a driver who becomes violent or a passenger who feels followed, the vulnerability of being alone in a car with a stranger is palpable. I came across another driver's experience that perfectly captured this sense of dread. Tom, a part-time Uber driver, had just picked up a passenger named Mark late one night. Mark was quiet, speaking only when necessary, and Tom noticed he held his phone with the flashlight on, illuminating his face in an eerie glow. The destination was a remote, wooded area outside the city, an unusual place for a rideshare drop-off. As they neared Mark's destination, he asked Tom to pull over near an old, abandoned house. Tom hesitated but complied. Mark got out and told Tom to wait in the car. Minutes passed. Then Mark suddenly returned, agitated, instructing Tom to drive to the other place. Tom asked for clarification, but Mark refused to explain. The tension in the car was thick, and Tom's instincts screamed at him that something wasn't right. Eventually, Mark demanded to be taken back to where Tom had picked him up. The drive back was silent and heavy, each mile filled with a creeping sense of unease. When they reached the original pickup spot, Mark leaned forward and asked Tom, "Have you ever thought about how you'd die?" The question hung in the air, chilling Tom to his core. Mark then exited the car and disappeared into the night. Tom later found that Mark's profile had vanished just like Greg's from Marcus's story. Uber had no record of the ride, leaving Tom with nothing but a haunting memory and a gnawing suspicion that he'd picked up someone far more dangerous than just a lost passenger. Each of these stories highlights how quickly situations can spiral out of control, how a simple ride can become a trap, a test of survival, or a psychological nightmare. Drivers, alone at night in their cars, can be targeted by passengers with violent intentions or unstable mental states. Passengers, especially those traveling alone or at odd hours, can find themselves vulnerable to drivers who blur the line between protector and predator. What struck me most was how these encounters often happened in isolated or unfamiliar areas, places where help was far away and the normal rules of safety felt suspended. The dark streets, empty parking lots, and abandoned buildings became backdrops for moments of fear and danger, magnifying every glance, every silence, every unexpected turn. As I reflected on these stories, I realized that the fear wasn't just about physical harm. It was about the psychological toll of being trapped in a confined space with someone you don't know, someone who might be unpredictable or hostile. The anxiety of wondering what will happen next, whether the driver will take a sudden detour, whether the passenger will lash out, whether the car will stop in the middle of nowhere and leave you stranded, hangs over every ride like a shadow. These stories also made me think about the systems in place, or the lack thereof, that are supposed to keep us safe. How effective are the background checks on drivers? How well does Uber monitor the behavior of passengers? And how much can an app really do when a situation turns dangerous in a matter of minutes? The answers aren't simple, but what these stories undeniably show is that despite all the technology, the ratings, and the safety features, the human element remains unpredictable. Trust has to be earned in those moments, and when it's broken, the consequences can be terrifying. As I prepared to share the next part of this collection, I was struck by how these stories reflected a broader reality, one where isolation and vulnerability can turn everyday situations into nightmare scenarios. The tension builds not just in the moments of confrontation, but in the quiet, unsettling silences and the eerie, unfamiliar places where these rides take place. The rideshare world is convenient and efficient, but behind the screens and apps lie real people with real fears. And sometimes, those fears come true in the most unexpected and chilling ways. The stories I'd uncovered were already chilling, but then I came across one that took the tension to a whole new level. A story so intense it felt like something out of a thriller movie rather than a real Uber ride. It was told by a driver named Alex, who shared a harrowing experience that began with an ordinary pickup and escalated into a desperate fight for survival. Alex had been driving for Uber for a couple of years and was familiar with the late-night shifts that often brought in a mix of passengers, some friendly, some quiet, and some just downright strange. One night, he received a ride request from a man named Jimmy. The app showed Jimmy's profile as average, with decent ratings, so Alex didn't hesitate to accept. Jimmy climbed into the back seat, looking nervous and fidgety. As they drove toward the outskirts of the city, Alex noticed Jimmy constantly glancing over his shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper when he spoke. When Alex asked if everything was okay, Jimmy hesitated before admitting that he was on the run, that he'd been involved in something bad and needed to get away fast. The destination wasn't on the app. Instead, Jimmy directed Alex to take a series of back roads, winding through dark neighborhoods and abandoned industrial areas. Alex's unease grew as the streets grew emptier and the night deeper. Then, suddenly, Jimmy pulled a knife from his jacket and pressed it against the back of Alex's head. "Don't say a word," Jimmy hissed. "If you try anything, I swear I'll hurt you." Alex's heart pounded. He forced himself to stay calm, pretending to comply as Jimmy ordered him to drive faster, away from the city limits. Every turn was calculated, every stop avoided. The car's interior felt like a prison. After what felt like hours, they reached a desolate warehouse district. Jimmy told Alex to park and get out, warning that he wouldn't hesitate to use the knife if Alex made a wrong move. As Alex stepped out, he realized he was completely alone, miles from any help, with a man who had no qualms about violence. But Alex wasn't about to give up. He noticed a security camera mounted above the warehouse entrance. Summoning every ounce of courage, he made a break for the camera, shouting for help. Jimmy lunged after him, but before he could reach Alex, the security guard appeared, alerted by the commotion and the flashing red light on the camera system. Police arrived moments later, and Jimmy was arrested. Alex's quick thinking had saved his life, but the memory of that night stayed with him, a stark reminder of the dangers lurking beneath seemingly routine rides. Just when I thought the stories couldn't get any more intense, I found another account. This one from a passenger named Megan. Her experience wasn't violent in the traditional sense, but it was disturbing in a way that cut deep into the psychological realm. Megan had taken an Uber home after a late shift at a downtown cafe. She was tired but relieved to be heading home in the early hours of the morning. The driver was quiet, polite, and professional, which put Megan at ease. But halfway through the ride, she noticed something strange. Her phone, which she had been holding just moments before, was suddenly missing from her bag. She asked the driver if he had seen it, but he claimed he hadn't. Megan's panic rose as she realized she had no way to contact anyone or call for help. Then, the oddest thing happened. As the driver continued down the road, Megan's phone lit up with a series of disturbing messages, texts sent from her own number. The messages were cryptic and threatening, filled with unsettling phrases that Megan couldn't understand. She demanded to know what was happening, but the driver only smirked and said, "You'll find out soon enough." The rest of the ride was a blur of fear and confusion. When Megan finally got out and ran into her apartment, she immediately changed her passwords, contacted Uber, and reported the incident. The police traced the messages and found that the driver had been manipulating her phone remotely, accessing her personal information and sending those threatening texts to unsettle and intimidate her. Megan's story was a chilling example of how the danger of an Uber ride isn't always physical. The psychological torment, the invasion of privacy, and the feeling of being hunted can be just as traumatic, if not more so. Both Alex's and Megan's experiences revealed a deeper, more unsettling truth about Uber horror stories. The danger isn't always obvious or immediate. Sometimes it hides in the shadows, in the unexpected twists that turn a simple ride into a complex nightmare. What struck me was how these incidents exposed vulnerabilities not just in the physical world, but also in the digital one. The technology that connects drivers and passengers, the very app that's supposed to make rides safe and transparent, can be exploited in disturbing ways. Whether it's a passenger with a weapon or a driver with malicious intent, the risks are multifaceted, blurring the lines between physical safety and digital security. These stories also highlighted how quickly the context can shift. One moment, you're just another rider or driver going about your day. The next, you're caught in a situation where every decision could mean the difference between escape and harm. And it's not just the immediate threat that lingers. The aftermath for those involved can be just as devastating. Alex was left with nightmares and a newfound wariness he couldn't shake. Megan felt violated, not just by the driver's actions, but by the sense that her privacy had been shattered in a place where she should have felt safe. Reading these stories made me think about the invisible dangers that often go unnoticed in the gig economy. The flexibility and convenience of ride-sharing come with a hidden cost, a vulnerability that can be exploited by those with ill intent. And while companies like Uber have introduced safety features, the human factor remains unpredictable and sometimes unmanageable. As I prepared to share the final stories I uncovered, I realized that these terrifying experiences are more than just cautionary tales. They're reflections of a system struggling to keep pace with the realities of modern life, where technology and human nature intersect in complex and sometimes dangerous ways. The unpredictability, the psychological twists, and the physical dangers all serve as stark reminders that even the most routine Uber ride can hold hidden threats. Threats that demand our attention, our awareness, and our respect. But before I move on to the aftermath and what these stories mean for the future, there's one more tale that left me unsettled long after I read it. A story that underlined just how deeply these encounters can affect those involved, both physically and mentally. The aftermath of these terrifying rides lingered long after the cars had pulled away, leaving scars far deeper than any physical injury. Drivers like Marcus, Jenna, Tom, and Alex all shared one thing in common. Their encounters left them shaken, wary of every passenger and every quiet moment behind the wheel. For many, the trauma didn't fade with time. It settled in, turning routine drives into anxiety-filled experiences. Marcus told me that after his encounter with Greg, he found it nearly impossible to drive at night without feeling a knot in his stomach. Every passenger's silence made him tense. Every unfamiliar face sparked a flicker of fear. He began double-checking the rearview mirror obsessively, his mind replaying Greg's ominous words. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." The memories haunted him, altering the way he approached his job and his life. Similarly, Lisa's experience of being followed by her Uber driver changed how she navigated the world. She stopped taking late-night rides alone and became hyper-aware of her surroundings. The feeling of being watched, of someone's eyes tracking her movements, didn't disappear overnight. It was a constant undercurrent of fear that shadowed her every step. The psychological toll on passengers was just as profound. Megan, whose phone was manipulated by her driver, described feeling violated on a level she hadn't anticipated. The invasion of her privacy, the messages sent from her own number, made her question the safety of her personal space, a space she assumed was protected by the ride-sharing service. Her trust in the system was shattered, replaced by a lingering sense of vulnerability. Even drivers who faced physical threats, like Jenna and Alex, grappled with the emotional aftermath. Jenna recounted nights when she would wake up drenched in sweat, reliving the moment David lunged at her. Alex spoke of a persistent hypervigilance, a feeling that danger could emerge from the shadows at any time. For them, the line between work and personal life blurred, as the trauma seeped into their everyday routine. These stories revealed a common thread: isolation. Whether it was a driver alone in a car late at night or a passenger traveling through empty streets, the sense of being utterly vulnerable was overwhelming. There was no one to turn to in those moments, no immediate help nearby. The confined space of a car became a trap, and the dark surroundings amplified every fear. The theme of helplessness also stood out. Many drivers and passengers felt powerless once the situation spiraled out of control. Attempts to call for help, to reason with an agitated passenger or driver, often failed. The technology meant to provide safety, the app's tracking, emergency buttons, or customer support, sometimes lagged behind the immediacy of the threat. This gap between expectation and reality pointed to systemic issues within the ride-sharing industry. Background checks on drivers, while thorough to some extent, couldn't always predict momentary lapses or concealed intentions. Passengers, too, sometimes used the service to mask dangerous behavior, knowing the anonymity the app provided. The sheer volume of rides happening every day made it challenging for companies to monitor or intervene in real time effectively. Moreover, safety features built into the apps, such as sharing trip details with trusted contacts or emergency buttons, relied heavily on users' awareness and willingness to activate them. In high-stress situations, where fear can cloud judgment, these measures might not be enough. The stories also underscored the blurred boundaries between driver and passenger roles. Both groups could be victims or perpetrators, sometimes switching roles depending on the circumstances. This complexity made it difficult to establish clear protocols or safeguard mechanisms that addressed all possible scenarios. Reflecting on these experiences, it became clear that the ride-sharing ecosystem operates in a delicate balance between convenience and risk. While technology has revolutionized transportation, it has also introduced vulnerabilities deeply tied to human behavior and unpredictability. There's also the broader context of the gig economy at play. Drivers often work long hours, sometimes late into the night, in isolated conditions. The pressure to accept rides for income can lead to situations where personal safety is compromised. Passengers, too, rely on the service for its accessibility and affordability, sometimes overlooking potential risks in the moment. These dynamics create a perfect storm where safety can be compromised despite the best intentions. The stories I encountered aren't just about isolated incidents, but reflect ongoing challenges in managing human factors within a technological framework. Yet, the responses from those involved reveal resilience and a growing awareness. Many drivers have adopted personal safety routines, avoiding certain neighborhoods, keeping doors locked, installing dash cams, or using apps designed to alert others during emergencies. Passengers have become more cautious about sharing trip details, checking driver profiles more carefully, and trusting their instincts when something feels wrong. The ride-sharing community, both drivers and passengers, is learning hard lessons from these incidents. Conversations about safety have become more prominent, pushing companies to enhance features and reconsider policies. But as these stories show, no system is foolproof, and vigilance remains crucial. Perhaps the most striking takeaway is the human cost behind these horror stories. The fear, trauma, and lasting impact aren't just statistics or headlines. They are lived realities. For those who've endured such encounters, the world feels less safe, and trust is harder to come by. Understanding these experiences helps to foster empathy and highlights the need for stronger protections and better support systems within the gig economy. It's a reminder that behind every rating and review, every trip shared on an app, are people navigating risks that can be invisible to the casual observer. As I prepared to delve into the final part of these stories, I kept thinking about the importance of vigilance, empathy, and systemic change. The tales of fear and resilience are a call to action, to listen, to learn, and to push for a safer environment where convenience doesn't come at the cost of security. In the wake of all these stories, one truth stood out clearly. Vigilance is the most crucial tool for both drivers and passengers. The convenience of ride-sharing services like Uber comes with inherent risks that no app can entirely eliminate. What these harrowing experiences have taught me is that awareness, preparation, and trust in one's instincts are the best defenses in an unpredictable situation. For drivers, this means setting clear boundaries and safety protocols. Many now recommend always keeping doors locked while driving, refusing rides that seem suspicious, and using dash cams to record interactions. Sharing trip details with friends or family members has become a common practice, allowing others to monitor the ride's progress in real time. Drivers are also advised to familiarize themselves with safe drop-off points, especially in unfamiliar or isolated areas, and to trust their gut if a passenger's behavior raises red flags. Passengers, too, have learned to take extra precautions. Confirming the driver's identity before getting into the car is essential, matching the license plate and the driver's photo with the app's information. Sharing trip details with trusted contacts and using the app's emergency features can provide an added layer of security. Perhaps most importantly, passengers are encouraged to trust their instincts. If something feels off, it's better to cancel the ride or ask the driver to pull over in a populated area. While these personal safety tips are vital, the stories also highlight a pressing need for systemic improvement. The gig economy operates on a model that prioritizes flexibility and efficiency, but it must also evolve to prioritize safety more robustly. Enhanced screening procedures, real-time monitoring of rides, and quicker response protocols could make a significant difference. Uber and other ride-sharing companies have introduced various safety features over the years, including in-app emergency buttons, ride tracking, and the ability to report drivers or passengers quickly. Yet the limitations of these tools become clear when faced with rapidly escalating situations where seconds count. There's also a call for better support systems for those affected by traumatic incidents, acknowledging that the aftermath can be just as challenging as the event itself. These true stories serve as sobering reminders that no technology can fully replace human caution. The convenience of summoning a ride at the tap of a screen is undeniable, but it comes with a responsibility to be alert, to prepare, and to protect oneself. At the same time, it's important to remember the human element on both sides of the ride. Drivers are not just service providers. They're individuals who often work long, isolated hours and face risks many don't see. Passengers, likewise, are people seeking safe and efficient transportation. Empathy and understanding are crucial in building a safer ride-sharing community. Ultimately, awareness and education can empower riders and drivers alike to navigate these risks more effectively. Sharing stories like these isn't about instilling fear, but about fostering understanding and preparedness. It's about recognizing that while ride-sharing is a modern convenience, it exists within a complex web of human behaviors and vulnerabilities. I hope that by sharing these accounts, more people will approach their rides with a blend of trust and caution, armed with practical steps to enhance their safety. Whether you're behind the wheel or in the back seat, staying alert, trusting your instincts, and using the tools available can mean the difference between a routine trip and a frightening ordeal. In the end, these stories stand as a testament to resilience and the need for ongoing vigilance. They remind us that safety isn't guaranteed by an app or a rating system. It's something we all have to actively pursue. As ride-sharing continues to evolve, so too must our commitment to protecting ourselves and each other. So, the next time you open your Uber app or get behind the wheel, remember these tales. Let them serve as a quiet warning and a call to action. To be cautious, to be prepared, and above all, to value safety above convenience. Because in the world of ride-sharing, that balance can sometimes be a matter of life and death.